Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi to a NAHida post-release analysis. So NAHIDA's been out for 13 days, almost 2 weeks. I've had the opportunity to play her in a bunch of different teams, and so now is the time, just as with every other character, to do a post-release analysis where I go through my pre-release analysis and we look at where I was right, where I was wrong, and yeah. I think that NAHIDA's best role is likely going to be on-field driver. And yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. There's a lot of different NAHida teams, so it's far from her only roles, and obviously depending on which team you're using, sometimes a team where she's not driver is going to perform better or a team where she is, but that's obviously like matchup dependent, depending on like the type of enemies you're facing and the type of teams you play. But as a general rule, yeah, I do think that her best role is generally going to be on-field driver, because her charge attacks do not share internal cooldown with her normal attacks, which means that if what you're trying to do is apply Dendro as quickly as possible, you're likely going to want to be doing some combination of normal and charge attacks, and when they cost 50, it's a pain in the ass. From what I've seen, while there are combo options that use charge attacks, the actual difference between using charge attacks and not using them is basically nothing. And so if you're ever in teams where you have effects that proc on normal attacks but not on charge attacks, such as Xingqiu's Burst, or Yelan's Burst, stuff like that, you wouldn't even want to use her charge attacks even if it wasn't for the stamina thing. So generally, yeah, just don't use the charge attacks at all. Unless you need them for like the Scaramouche boss fight, because it's the only part of NAHIDA's E that can hit the like flying little things after he phases. They have a pretty small AoE. I guess it is kind of similar to YAHida's charge attacks in terms of AoE. Yeah, for her normal attacks, it is somewhat similar. It's not exactly the same like width and length, but it's definitely the same shape. Right, where it's like in a line just like that. They even have like the same, like a similar pattern on the ground where it goes like in a zigzag a little bit. And they have a similar shape, so yeah. And then the hold, you basically enter some sort of aiming mode. So what you can do is you can just go in aiming mode, flick, and this is gonna apply it in an arc in front of you. Yeah, and you can also just do a 360 with it. I don't know if I say that later, I might. My mousepad is very small and my sensitivity is not that big, so I run out of mousepad if I do this. Like I'm out of mousepad at the end. So I like just going here and just doing an arc like this. It's very, very easy to hit all the enemies with it. It deals standard damage to all of the linked enemies, all of the enemies that you hit with your E. This basically means that NAHIDA's gonna be one of the best units at consolidating AoE. I've talked about this a little bit when I was recording the burning video. I don't know if the burning video will end up coming before or after this one, but I talked about it a little bit, and it's a pretty big deal when it comes to like people that don't want to spend a lot of time in Abyss resetting, because if you can consolidate your AoE, you just E on like the whole room, and then you hit one of them and the other ones keep taking damage from your E. It helps you a lot if you don't want to have to reset and learn how like to group the enemies properly with their AI or whatever. That can be like a pretty big deal for people who don't want to bother learning the attack patterns and stuff like that. People that are more on the casual side. The Hydro buff doesn't really do much. The Hydro buff makes the burst last longer, but if you actually have a Hydro on your team, sometimes your burst is less relevant, so it lasting longer doesn't do that much. They gave her a somewhat convoluted C1 that feels like it's doing a lot, but basically doesn't do anything. If you accidentally pull for C1, it's not going to feel like you got anything meaningful, but it is going to feel like you're halfway there to C2. So it's constellations like this are basically just a bait for you to swipe to get the C2. Yeah, the C2 is... I stand by that. Her C1 is not good. Like, it's not bad. There are teams where it can actually be relatively relevant. Like, when you don't run electro units at all, the C1 can actually be a pretty big deal. But even then, in a lot of those teams, does it really matter that much? Meh. Especially after the fucking endgame use, like, they're not going to make it real endgame. You're not going to need your characters to be strong. I also stand by that. I mean, we'll talk about power level later, but NAHIDA is very strong while also being very easy to use, which makes it so that even if you're not a theory crafter, you can kind of just kill Abyss without having to think about it. Even if you don't want to learn about the meta shit, you can still kind of just kill Abyss without having to think about it too much. C2 exacerbates that issue even more. So you're gonna get a Dendro op, and because you didn't
then remove all of your pyro, it's gonna re-trigger burning. Which means that for Ganyu specifically, because there's a larger than 2.5 second delay between her charge shot. And
alright, so that was wrong. You can shoot Ganyu's charge shot in less than 2.5 seconds, which can actually change the way that this exactly works. I talked about it in the burning video. You can still make it work, but there are going to be a few caveats that can prevent you from making it work properly. So I would encourage, if you want to play burning with Ganyu, you watch my burning video. That's probably gonna come out before this one, but might end up needing to come out after because I really want to put this video out before NAHida's banner is gone. So it does still work, but there's a few things you need to be careful of. Basically, there's a specific timing that if you do it at that timing, you're gonna lose your pyro. If you're playing her in a Quicken team, because you get so much value from the Gilded Dreams set bonus, going Gilded Dreams versus Deepwood, even if you don't have another character on your team that can go Deepwood, isn't actually that much of a damage loss. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. The difference in damage isn't big enough. So if you've got better stats on your Gilded than on your Deepwood set, and NAHida's your only Dendro in a Quicken team where you don't trigger bloom reactions, then Gilded Dreams can be fine.
But if you do have something that has good stats, consider the option.
The fuck is that? Is this real or is this photoshopped? The values are possible. Yeah, no, it's photoshopped. This is more blurry than this is. So this is photoshopped. SMH editor, why would you do this to me? That being said though, we don't need to use photoshopped ones anymore now, do we?
And the thing about burgeon teams is that the main / only real reason to play burgeon over Hyperbloom is that burgeon does AoE damage. But if you're not actually triggering your reactions in AoE, there's just not as much of a reason to play it. I still think these teams can be good. I don't expect them to be nearly as popular and fun to play, or good, as the Hyperbloom versions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But there's definitely a lot of ways that you can make your burgeon teams good by adapting the archetype. If you want to know about those ways, I've made a video on burgeon reactions where I basically go over all the ways you can build your burgeon teams. We can leave a link to that down in the description. Burning is a bit better than I give it credit for here, right? I ended up saying meh. It does have some places where it can be good, kind of just because it's really brain dead to make it work.
Let's move on to the builds and shit.
Okay, so let's move on to the builds and shit.
Fruit of Fulfillment, which is the new prototype, we're also not going to talk about very much because as ER gives EM at the cost of attack, but the amount of EM it gives is less than Magic Guide, and the ER is useless.
Okay, the ER is not useless. I think I talk about it a little bit later in the Fab section, but even then, Fruit of Fulfillment is still shit.
Obviously, her signature weapon gives EM to the rest of your team, but point is basically, if you have Kagura's, don't waste your buddy on fucking floating trees.
Yeah, good point.
Wandering Even Star is one of the new weapons. It's not bad. It's definitely not worth going for on a banner. As you can see, right, a high refined ends up being a pretty solid option.
Yeah, another thing about Wandering Even Star is that with the buff to other party members, it very often ends up being her best 4-star option, but it's not like her best by enough of a margin to justify wishing for it. I don't know. It's like all of these weapons, after actually like playing her, everything just feels so shit compared to Fab.
But if you are going to be looking at energy requirements, stuff like Vivonius Codex obviously gains a lot of value. Similar for Fruit of Fulfillment, Hyperbloom Ring.
Alright, so one thing that I guess was cut from the energy calc to, I guess, make the video shorter because it was already too long, but that I said when I did them, is that the amount of particles that you generate depends heavily on which team you're on. And so her energy requirements can vary anywhere between basically none to up to like almost 200. And so because of that, and then on top of that, because the length of your rotations can be different, your E won't always proc when you're on field, sometimes it's gonna proc when you're off field, and sometimes it's gonna proc when you are on field. There's a lot of variance in the amount of energy recharge you'll need to get your burst off cooldown. I always like going for more ER than the average, just to be safe in case I get an unlucky thing where, I don't know, my official E doesn't generate as much energy as usual because particles are RNG, POG. But that 180 isn't for like every single team where she's off field. It's for some teams where she's off field. And it can be less. It's very much going to depend on the team you're on. I would generally recommend just trying it out for yourself and figuring out how much you actually need because it depends on too many things. I think it's too much of a pain to go through every single potential team she can have because she has so many, and then every variation of it. And then on top of that, you have to, okay, well, what if Toma on that team is using Favonius instead of Kitane Cross Spear? Now you're generating more energy, so you don't need as much ER on your NAHida. Basically, right, all of this to say, the ER requirements are very, very, very variable. And so if you don't have 180, and you're playing her off field, that doesn't necessarily mean you won't get your burst when you want it. You definitely still can in some situations. That being said, because so many of her teams are teams where her personal damage is like nice, but it's not the main form of damage on your team. I'd say I like Fav even more now, like after playtesting it a lot, than I did in the pre-release. My NAHida, unless I'm playing her in a team where I know that nobody on the team needs the ER, my NAHida is always on Fav. The only team on which I play her on something that isn't Fav is when I play a TF Kazuha team, where, because I'm playing TF Kazuha, I generate so many animal particles that both my Kazuha and my Venti don't need literally any ER. Because I'm using Venti and I'm infusing it with Electro, I'm generating a lot of energy through Venti's Ascension Facet for Fischl. So Fischl doesn't have any ER requirements, and then obviously Fischl generates energy for herself as well. And then you just generate so many particles total that NAHida is fine as well. And then on top of that, that's a team where NAHida's burst isn't even that useful, so her burst herself doesn't matter. So when I'm playing that specific team, I put my NAHida on Widsith, and basically any other situation, my NAHida's on Fav. It doesn't mean that you should always go for Fav, but I guess it goes to show that Fav is definitely a very, very solid option, and personally, mine is basically glued to Fav now. Okay, I would probably place Fav right below Kagura's in general, probably Widsith and Sak above Lost Prayers, maybe Magic Guide too. But again, right, because she has so many different teams, and in each different team she can have a different weapon ranking, it's hard to decide like which teams matter more. So there is some subjectivity to this.
Okay, artifact sets. 4-piece, Deepwood. This is her set. Don't go Gilded Dreams.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this, right? Gilded Dreams can be almost as good if you don't need the Dendro Red Shred for a different character, for Bloom or for another Dendro stuff. It's still a bit worse, but if your stats are really good, then you can use it.
Finally, we got 4-piece Steve.
Great practical joke, Jim. Got me go to the annex.
4-piece TF is a 100% a meme, and you bet your ass I'll be doing it. Like, I will 100% be playing 4-piece TF. But
It's not good.
We have just now had and 4-piece increased Bloom, Hyperbloom, and burgeon damage.
Yeah, that does seem to be a thing that's coming. It's better than Gilded for your non-NAHida characters that actually trigger
And the numbers on
reactions.
it are pretty good.
Yeah, it's not going to be better on her. On her, you probably still just want to run Deepwood, but it is going to be better on the rest of your team.
Artifact stats. Sands, EM. Goblet, damage percent, or EM. Circlet, crit, or EM. As a general rule, EM is always good, up until it's not. So let's get back to...
True!
The biggest thing to keep in mind is just going to be, don't go over 1,000. There are teams where you might want to go over 1,000, but that's basically only the Nilou teams. It's better to be at 1,000 EM with a Dendro Goblet than 1,187 EM with an EM Goblet.
If you're specifically playing NAHida in an on-field role where you don't have that great Quicken up time, attack percent isn't that bad either. But it's not better, it's just not as far behind, so if you have really good stats, you can consider it. But generally, it's not what you want to be going for.
I think that just leaves us with a team. On-fielding your NAHida, the more Dendro you apply, the harder it is to maintain an underlying Electro.
Okay, if you're on-fielding NAHida, I would say you probably don't want to use an animal unit. I've talked about some of the issues that you can run into in NAHida Quicken in the Quicken video that also might come out or might not come out before this video, but most of that applies to off-field NAHida. If you end up on-fielding her, your Dendro app is going to be a lot, which can like really prevent you from actually getting Electro Swirls. But it's not just that. It's not just like getting your VV. It's also if the enemy has Dendro on them and your Kazuha burst is going, it's going to apply Electro, it's going to trigger Quicken, and then it's going to apply Animal, but your Electro triggered Quicken, it didn't apply Electro. So you just don't swirl anything, which means that you don't get the damage from the swirls and the aggravated swirls that Kazuha can do if you don't have underlying Dendro in the enemy. So generally, the ways that you can work around NAHida's potential issues for Quicken when you play her off-field very often won't work if you play her on-field. So if you play her on-field, I would generally say to just ditch the animal unit altogether.
On-field Hyperbloom, she's gonna be really good. I don't think there's much else to say.
Yeah, obviously, she has a lot of different teams, a lot of which are better or worse against specific types of content, but I do stand by the statement that on-field Hyperbloom is generally her best team. It's just so good. But it's not just how good it is, it's also just so easy to play. Like, you can actually just be mashing your keyboard and you'll just be fine.
I'm wondering about the possibility of playing double Dendro off-field and on-fielding an Electro unit with an off-field Hydro or a Hydro unit with an off-field Electro.
Haven't liked it very much.
Oh, you know what's really funny? You can do on-field YAHida with EM Raiden, but you can also do full ER YAHida with on-field EM Raiden. Oh, I think, okay, I'm definitely gonna have some fun with that.
I haven't had some fun with that yet. I should do that. That's a good idea. But For off-field Hyperbloom, like I've said, Double Dendro, not really, but she definitely does have a lot of options, just the same way you'd play Dendro main character if you want to play her off-field. And those are all, I mean, they're good, right? They were good with Dendro main character, they're going to be good with NAHida.
Off-field burning, cope, but functional.
Okay, burning is a bit better than I gave it credit for. Again, you can check out the burning video.
NAHida's E will activate when you trigger a reaction. In Nilou teams, you only have one reaction, which means that the only way that NAHida can trigger her E in a Bloom team is if there's a Bloom reaction. That has two consequences. The first one being you can't play her off-field in Bloom teams as a solo Dendro because, well, she's not applying Dendro unless you're already applying Dendro and getting reactions. And off-field, that's the only Dendro she has, the one that's reliant on you triggering a reaction. So if you need a reaction to trigger a reaction, you won't trigger a reaction, and therefore you won't trigger a reaction.
True. That being said, if you have a lot of enemies and one of them is like far away, it's possible that like that enemy doesn't get hit by some of your Hydro applications, so you can still kind of use them to kind-of-ish a little bit play off-field NAHida's solo Dendro. In Bloom teams, I generally would say just don't. Just on-field her.
I think that the biggest obstacle in those teams is unironically going to be not dying to your own blooms. Because with the amount of blooms that you should be able to trigger with NAHida...
I mean, I don't know, those of you who've played on-field NAHida with Nilou, it's hard not to die to your own damage. Like, you'll go in the red HP very, very quickly. Your burst in those teams doesn't actually do that much because most of your blooms are owned by your Hydro units, and you want to off-field your NAHida, which means that your burst gives EM to your NAHida, but she's not triggering that many blooms, so it doesn't do that much. And then on top of that, because you don't have any Electro or Pyro on those teams, it doesn't buff the speed at which your E hits or the damage, so literally all your burst does is gives EM. But you still want to use it, even though it's a long-ass 2-second animation that gives you an incredibly minor buff on a character that can't take that, like that can't gain much from it. You still use your burst, not because you want to get the bonuses from your burst, but because it's iframes, and if you don't use it, you will die. It's funny, but in general, in those teams, just keep your burst to iframe when you're about to die.
After thinking about it more, you guys have already seen in the first video how the team stuff has changed, but I do want to like actually change the words I'm using here to reflect that. On-field Quicken, off-field Quicken, Quicken will still be solid.
Okay, I think on-field Quicken is a little bit worse than I give it credit for.
Off-field Hyperbloom, I shouldn't say it's gonna be solid. It's gonna be a lot like DMC is doing now. On-field,
yeah.
Also, I didn't talk about off-field Burgeon, and that's probably gonna be solid as well.
Honestly, on-field Burgeon is solid as well.
Same for this one, actually.
Yeah.
Because off-field burning is not nearly as cope because of the way that the Ganyu mechanic I've talked about in the previous video, I think. It's gonna be like okay. So
yeah, maybe a little bit above okay, but still, yeah, pretty solid.
I can talk about Quick Bloom.
Pretty okay. She's got too many good teams. Like, she
The biggest problem with making a video on NAHida is that she has too many viable team options that are just like cope viable, but like actually solid viable.
So I would say that overall, this is probably one of the best pre-releases I've done. A few of the mistakes that I had made when I initially recorded it, I realized before I actually published the video. So I had a bunch of like post-editing Zajef like segments that were added into to correct those. And I don't think there's much that I talked about in the pre-release that was wrong that I didn't correct before the video came out. And so, yeah, I think this is probably one of my better pre-releases. I'm pretty proud of it. It's also, I think, my best performing video now. Yeah, it is, by a pretty big margin, even though it's only 2 weeks old, 2.5, almost 3. Yeah, so I'm glad you guys are, Jesus, this video's already at 120. I think people like NAHida. But I'm pretty glad that my pre-release that's popped off the most so far seems to be one of the ones where I was the most accurate, so that's cool. That's fog. I'm happy about that. The main things that I got wrong here were I underestimated Fav even after the post-release. Fav is better than post-editing Zajef thought. I underestimated burning, and yeah, that's kind of it, actually. So, Pog. Don't you worry, though. I make mistakes all the time. I'm relatable sometimes, too. Just watch the Nilou post-release. The Nilou post-release, I talk about a bunch of the shit that I got wrong. If you want to see me be wrong, you can go check that out. If you want to see me be right, you can obviously go watch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Zajef77, where I'm literally always right. I've never made a single mistake in my life. I'm just by far the best and most smartest and most humblest theory crafter in the world. True. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the pre-release. And yeah, I hope you're having fun with NAHida if you ended up going for her. As like closing thoughts, she's an Archon. She's going to get a rerun in like 2 patches anyways. So if you don't have the premos to go for her now, don't feel forced to spend. She'll be back soon. That's what Archons do. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye, YouTube.